Marc put the hard-on back into rock and roll. He made it shiny, he made it effervescent, he made it fun.
He was definitely born to boogie, yes, he was always a star.
France is fine, France is good, everybody says it's just like Robin Hood.
I mean, Marc, I felt was certainly a pioneer and the prince of glam rock.
He was a big influence on the 70s because he was the first real glam rocker in the way he looked. Everybody else followed him, even Bowie.
He gets labelled as a glam act. He's not a glam act. He's a great pop rock act, one of the great ones.
He was constantly exploring himself and musical frontiers and expanding them.
T-Rex was probably one of the most influential bands of the 70s. Without T-Rex, I'm not sure whether David Bowie would have actually come up with a Ziggy Stardust image. I'm not sure whether glam would have happened. I'm not sure whether we would have seen men with long hair walking around with feather boas and glitter.
He definitely sort of changed the direction of sort of British music.
If I am a star, it feels all right. You know, it's...
Are you? Ed Woon star?
I don't know, people have said that. I consider myself an artist, you know? And a writer, poet, guitar player. So if that's what a star is, then I must be a star, I suppose.
Right in the beginning, Marc Bolan had the magic. But right in the beginning, he wasn't tapped into it, as he was later on. It's the learning process. But he always had the capability of French kissing the angels and being French kissed back.
Tyrannosaurus Rex, when they first came out, were basically a duo. They were Marc Bolan and Steve Took, and Tyrannosaurus Rex was a folk duo, if you like.
Well, Tyrannosaurus Rex had a great cult following. They really did very, very well on the university circuit and at festivals.
As a DJ on the radio in Ireland, as a young chap, I would play Tyrannosaurus Rex records in all their transcendental jingle jangle, hippy dippy, bleating voice glory.
Tyrannosaurus Rex had done 3 albums, which, you know, had not really done much, to be quite honest, as far as sales were concerned, but showed us the creative output of Mr. Bolan's mind.
They were very, very a psychedelic hippie sort of love power band. He had lots of those hippie sort of principles. It was all love and things like that. Not as if he did change his principles, but he perceived, and everyone perceived, that things had changed drastically in the market, and bands like Zeppelin were coming along, and bands like Free were taking over, and rock was beginning to move.
So the early albums had captured this Tyrannosaurus Rex phenomenon, but economically it wasn't going anywhere really, and Marc realised that if he was going to be a big rock star like, say, Roger Daltrey of The Who or somebody he might admire, you know, he realised that he'd have to do something bigger and stronger.
Steve wanted to keep it a hippie thing, and Marc wanted to progress and to become a star.
You will find that Steve Peregrine Took was not with Marc Bolan after that period. And in fact, that's where Mr. Mickey Finn comes in.
Mickey Finn was, in order to be handsome, charming, lovely man who played the bongos all right.
Mickey, in the Tyrannosaurus Rex, when he first came in, was imitating something which Steve Took invented. And that, of course, was because at the time, that's what Marc wanted.
Having Mickey Finn there also meant that he wasn't complaining about the electric guitar, because he was just happy to be there. And you know, Marc wanted to make the decisions that was fine by him, so he was along for the ride.
And suddenly we've got a 4th album looming. They go into the studio, And when the engineers and producer come into the studio, they're greeted by not the usual but electric guitars.
It was a matter of getting off being cross-legged on the stage, plugging in the guitar, shaking it up, and wham bam, thank you ma'am, you know.
That initial transformation from Tyrannosaurus Rex to T-Rex, it did upset quite a few fans. The actual decision to change the name to T-Rex is to do with Tony Visconti, who was producing them at the time. He'd actually discovered Tyrannosaurus Rex. He was on a mission to find the next Beatles.
First thing had to be done was shorten the name. If you have a really long name, it's going to be little on the poster or any graphic, you know. If you have a short name, you can make it bigger, i.e. more visible, you know. Tyrannosaurus Rex was a great name, very evocative name, but it wasn't the sort of thing that would trip off a housewife's tongue.
People were finding it difficult to pronounce Tyrannosaurus Rex. I think Tony Blackburn or some DJ couldn't even say the word properly. So, you know, Marc didn't initially go with it, but then eventually he did.
Tony Visconti was a very, very able producer, and he came from a different environment. He came from New York. He'd been producing Bowie for a long time. His principle was to make records that were radio friendly.
Marc Bolan sort of reinvented himself as T-Rex and went into the more rockier side and stuff, you know, that he came up with the more contemporary sort of music.
It's like a worship for me to write, because I don't do it, you know, it's like I'm being used by a melody as a being, if you want, and there are certain chords that just, there are magic mists within those chords. You play a sort of C major chord, and I hear like 25 melodies and symphonies up here. I just got to pull one out.
As T-Rex, Marc really wanted something that was bigger. He wanted to be a rock and roll star. And what had happened was he was getting a bit moody about these things, and his wife at the time, his first wife, June Child, just got fed up, and she said, right, go on. Go into the bedroom, and I'm going to lock you in there, and tomorrow morning when I come out, I want you to have written at least, you know, a few songs, and we're going to stick it on this album, because I'm just fed up with this. And so Marc went in there, locked himself away, and the following morning the story goes that June came in with this cup of coffee and said, okay, what have you done? And he produced this track, Ride a White Swan, and he said, yeah, I'm happy with this.
Ride a White Swan was the first complete change from the old Tyrannosaurus Rex to T-Rex. They actually became from a totally album-orientated band to a band that was driven by hits.
Ride it on out like a bird in the sky whiz. Ride it on out like you were a bird. Fly it on out like an eagle in the sunbeam. Ride it on out like you were a bird. We're a tall hat like a druid in the old days. We're a tall hat in a tattooed gown. Ride a white swan like the people of a Belgian. Way ahead long, baby, can't go wrong.
It charted at number 25. And then it was kind of around. You'd hear it occasionally. Radio had started to pick up on it.
It took time for people to sort of to realise that they liked it.
And suddenly it was not reissued or re-promoted, I think's the word we're looking for, re-promoted, and bang, it goes up to number 2.
DJ started to play it, and the public went bananas. The teenage population discovered Marc Bolan, and overnight, virtually, he was elevated from being an icon of the hippie generation and the King's Road into becoming a nationwide pop idol.
Ride a white swan like the people of a Beltane. Way along,
first time that I noticed Marc was Ride a White Swan, Top of the Pops, and I was just totally amazed by the fact that he had so much charisma. And I remember actually sort of my mum sort of like disapproving and saying, you know, he's a freak.
This man had had an audience of the most aged, wisest, acid-taking, mad, wizard, freak, weirdos, underground people in this country for years, and overnight he's suddenly got this whole new audience of little teeny, weeny, beany, pop pixie children.
And it was very different, you know. I think that's why he's such a legend nowadays, because you had all the blues stuff coming through in the late 60s, and all that sort of free and bands like that, and then comes along this little guy with a guitar playing Ride a White Swan.
It's a very simple song, but just great. I think his vocal, because before Marc's vocal was always a bit slurred, and he had this particular diction thing going on, and the trem on his voice, and it's still there in Ride a White Swan. You know, you have to listen close to actually hear about the lyric itself. But you know, fantastic delivery, and already his vocal was starting to mellow out a bit. His diction was becoming a bit clearer, much more commercial again, much more pop oriented.
And so suddenly the whimsical fairy tale had a backbeat, and suddenly the poetry had volume, and suddenly girls were looking at his trousers, and suddenly the audience looked like Marc Bolan.
Changing the style of the music slightly allowed it to reach a mass audience, really.
Was it premeditated?
No, not at all. It just sort of came into it, you know. It moved into the realm of sort of commercial music on its own, really. I think it's probably the only way that it can happen.
Once Ride a White Swan had been out, they brought out their first album as T-Rex.
T-Rex's first album as T-Rex was a self-titled album. It was actually their last album as a duo. At that stage, Marc Bolan and Mickey Finn had this kind of, it was on an even partnership, I suppose. Marc hadn't quite taken the centre stage just yet.
It was also possibly not the first T-Rex album, but the last Tyrannosaurus Rex album.
Marc was still toying around with these sort of slightly mystical lyrics that he was very interested with, kind of elves and witches and things like that.
Oh, I thought it was great. I mean, tracks like Jewel, you know, they really rock out. They kind of light in a way, but the guitaring's lovely.
T-Rex album is still very much a bridging album with a lot of the Tyrannosaurus Rex sounds, and the T-Rex sound hasn't really been totally formed.
Great album, you know, and it married the old and the new together. Again, you know, the Wizard went into rock. A lot of stuff left over that he thought was sort of faves, and blended them in together with his new sound and his new look.
My woman of gold, and she's not very old, She's my woman of gold, and she's not very old, I don't mean
what made Hot Love a hit was because it's a cool record, you know, it just vibes along. You play it right now, you know, you're actually going to play in a minute, or is it playing already? I don't know. And it's very upful. It's uplifting, you know.
This is when you got to take on board, they've gone from a 2-piece to a 4-piece with, I believe, a Mr. Curry, who was brought in on bass, and on drums, a guy called Bill Fifield, I believe, but who became Bill Legend, because that was the band that he was plucked from to join T-Rex.
I started out, you know, just with 2 people, and slowly I augmented it when I thought I could cope with it, you know, but I enjoyed working with perhaps the string section, so there's a lot of people. I wouldn't want to have that responsibility of having to work with them all the time, you know.
But this is your basic T-Rex group of 4 players, drums,
sure, yeah, and it's a question of economics as well, believe it or not. I mean, to go on the road is incredibly expensive. You know, we have to find $1,000 a week before you can play. You know?
She ain't not a witch, and I love the way she treats you.
That's the first single, the first song that you can actually hear the sound, which really sort of summarizes T-Rex. You've got this slightly folky element, you've got some of the electric guitars in there, and you have these really bizarre backing vocals. It was very unusual even at the time. And I mean, in a way, they're almost slightly childish sounding, perhaps, the backing vocals, but that was what made that sound.
I think one of the nice things about Hot Love was that it sounded like everybody was having fun. It brought back fun and you know, and entertainment. And Marc brought back with his, you know, with the clothes that he was starting to wear, he brought back entertainment into music.
I think it was a simple track with a lot of air in it, and not too cluttered. And I think that was the magic of it.
When they put out Hot Love, this was it. This was the real deal. They actually, you could see a pattern forming. You could see that they became like the Stones and the Who and the Beatles and the Kinks in the early days. They started to put together a string of hits that you can look back on and think, bloody hell.
Get It On, I suppose, is one most people remember. And I think it's probably been used a lot in TV advertising. It's sort of, I don't know, there's something about the theme that sticks in your mind and it encapsulates the 70s, really. It's sort of optimistic and groovy and hedonistic and having fun.
Marc's guitar riff and the drum figure that brings it. I mean, that just kicks it off right there.
Get it on, bang on, get it on, and down, ow, ow, ow. You know, those snaps, fantastic.
It was the one that went straight to #1. It didn't just hang around the charts a bit. That was it. T-Rex was in full flow. And Get It On was much like Hot Love in the kind of the style of music. It was slightly electric guitars, and it was, he dropped some of that sort of mystical element as well. It was quite a sort of a sexy song.
Get It On it was a more sort of a gutsier single than Hot Love.
You dirty, sweet, black, don't look back, and I love you. You're dirty and sweet, oh yeah. You're slim.
It has some very special people playing on it. Firstly, you've got Rick Wakeman, who was at his majestic, glittery, huge glittery cloak, playing piano on it.
You don't notice the keys so much playing. Production probably why, but you don't notice the keys playing. Wakeman, but he does this whole run down the keys, which you hear. So that's his sort of contribution, I suppose, really, is that run down the keys.
You have got Ian MacDonald, who not only played saxophone for Foreigner, but played saxophone for King Crimson, and was a King Crimson member, to be quite honest. Yes, he's playing saxophone on it.
The saxophone, Ian MacDonald's playing probably could have been used more, would have been nice, but it works, and that sound, again, was copied on 70s glam rock acts.
It was really the only song that actually had a decent chart position in America, and this was the bane of Marc Bolan's career, really, or his life, was he wanted to get his stuff heard in America. He wanted to get out to this American audience.
Get It On was probably one of their best records. I mean, they also had some credibility. You know, they had the guy from King Crimson playing on it. They've also done the Top of the Pops with Elton John's been on it. It's like everyone liked T-Rex. Everyone thought they were a credible band.
People who hadn't sort of discovered T-Rex with Ride a White Swan, they'd either discovered them by Hot Love, or if not, certainly by Get It On. And so obviously Electric Warrior was just the album that went with that, and really, I think, brought in a lot more fans.
Marc Bolan was here and the world was getting to know about him, and that album certainly was his ship or his plane that carried him extremely well.
You couldn't help but love the album.
I could have chained your heart to a star, but it really doesn't matter at all. No, it really doesn't matter at all. Life's a guide.
Marc Bolan had stuck to this sort of real 3-minute pop song formula, but it's just got that slightly glammy, rocky kind of feel to it. There were some great tracks on it.
Mambo Sun, Cosmic Dancer, Jeepster, Monolith, Lean Woman Blues, Get It On, Planet Queen, Girl, The Motivator, Life's a Gas, and Rip Off, which some people say is the first rock rap track.
The cover I liked a lot as well. It was very simple and spare, and the black and gold cover with Mark with his little Marshall amp and guitar.
I could have burned your feet in the sand, but it all really doesn't matter at all. No, it all really doesn't matter at all. Life's a guide.
Electric Warrior is one of those points where T-Rex came into their own, and you know, he realised on that album as well. I think he was realising himself. I think this set a benchmark for him, and made him go, right, now I've got my direction, I know where I'm going with this.
A lot of the lyrics, I think, were starting to become a lot more sort of sexual, although in a very subliminal way. You know, which of course, obviously, as teenagers are sort of reaching puberty and starting to pick up sort of things like that. You know, Bleached on the Beach, I want to tickle your peach. It's a rip-off.
They hit a peak. They actually were in the groove. They got all the songs right. Tony was producing brilliantly with them.
All of these songs would have been done as acoustic demos and presented in that form. And then this guy's had the vision to see Get It On, Mambo Sun, Jeepster, all taken on, you know, that big, huge, pop, beautiful level of perfection.
You know, there were tracks like that, Life's a Gas and Monolith, that were just slightly slower, a little bit more folky, but by that stage, a lot of the hippies that had been into the band originally, when they used to sit cross-legged on the floor, they really thought that album was a sellout. But at the end of the day, Marc Bolan didn't want to just have this cult status. He wanted to be a big star. He wanted to be #1. He wanted to have hordes of screaming fans after him.
Life's a Gas. I mean, I was a T-Rex fan, but I found that one a bit hard to swallow, just because it was so perfectly sweet and sugar candy production, but I didn't want sweet and sugar candy. I wanted my lean woman blues, which again, listen to Dylan, early Dylan with the electric guitar. It's almost could have come from any of those early Dylan albums.
I used to go to Mark's house in Marble Arch, and across his lounge he had albums stacked from one end to the other, and looking at them there were just too many to kind of pull out, but he was certainly into Bob Dylan. I think Bob Dylan would have been one of his main influences.
I was always surprised that the Americans didn't take to it more. They could have left Europe for 6 months, done America, come back for a couple of months, then gone back to America, and no one would have noticed the difference. Because they were in every magazine, they were doing every television interview, they were doing everything you could ever want to do. Everyone was talking about T-Rex. T-Rex became part of the pop rock establishment. They were there and they were thought of as brilliant.
Electric Warrior is that album that made everybody sit up and take notice, and everybody said, okay, T-Rex, they're here to stay.
Well, I was very flattered because all the Beatles in their own way said that we were like their successors. I'm not sure that it's true, but I'm very, very flattered. It's nice, it's an encouraging thing, you know.
Marc Bolan's record label with T-Rex was Fly Records, and the Electric Warrior album was the final album that was released on Fly Records. It was a sort of contractual obligation, and Jeepster was actually a single that Fly Records decided to release after the contract had terminated with Marc Bolan. They'd managed to find a loophole, and Marc wasn't particularly happy about this. He didn't really want Jeepster out as a single, but he went along with it.
You're so sweet, oh so fair. You got the universe reclining in your hair. 'Cause you're my love. Oh, girl, I'm just a Jeepster for your love.
Jeepster was a splendid adaptation of a Howlin' Wolf song called You'll Be Mine. It's the same riff completely, and got to number 2, which was not bad.
Number 2 in the charts. Mark wasn't very happy with it, but it was 15 weeks in the charts, which isn't bad for a single.
As a song, I mean, it is one of my favourites. Going back, I mean, when that came out, of course, it has got the line at the end, I'm going to suck you. Which, again, as a sort of teenager, you know, sort of teenage girls have incredibly smutty minds.
Jeepster was probably, I think it was a closing of a period for T-Rex. They'd got to a point where they'd really, that was phase 1, or phase 1 of T-Rex. After this, Mark was then trying to find another angle, because he'd successfully been a chameleon and moved the whole thing once. I always get the impression that he was looking to do it again.
Certainly, there's been a change in England in 2 years. And we are part of the change. I mean, guys now can wear makeup, they can shout and scream, and they can and say that they. I mean, I can now go on television, on a news program. I don't know even what this is for, but in England I can go on a news program, right, and say my mind.
Telegram Sam, January 1972, number 1, first release on Mark's label, distributed by EMI Records, and I think the third number 1 T-Rex pop chart wonderment in 11 months. It's not bad going.
Telegram Sam, Telegram Sam, you are my main man. Golden no slim, golden no slim.
At the time, we music critics tended to look down our nose a bit at Marc at this point for repeating himself. You know, if you hear a succession of the hits one after the other over a short, over a few months, you start to think, well, he's losing the plot here. But in retrospect, actually, they're all great, you know. Telegram Sam still sounds great. You hear it again 20 years later, and you think, well, that's good fun, that's a great record, it still stands out.
They managed to actually create a bigger sound, if you like. Electric Warrior had a lot of orchestral parts that Tony Visconti had put onto it, but with Telegram Sam, from the royalties that they'd actually had from the previous number ones, they were able to put a lot more money into buying new equipment, more state-of-the-art stuff, so they were able to get a much more professional sound. And in a way, that was, Marc Bolan was happy with that. He wanted the band to sound that little bit more polished.
I always think that Telegram Sam, to me, probably my favourite T-Rex single. Just a great record. It's got attitude, it's got humour, it's got everything that Bowie and the Beatles used to do really well. It's taking a little bit of the mickey out of the whole business.
What does it mean? What did he, in the song that he called you, what does that mean?
I don't know, idea.
No?
I know nothing. It's Purple Brown Beep, you know, it's whatever you want.
One thing I didn't understand at the time was the fact that, of course, Telegram Sam was a song written about Marc's manager, Tony Secunda, hence the initials TS, Telegram Sam, and TS, Tony Secunda, who became Marc's manager late in '71.
Telegram Sam was taken off the Slider album, and this saw Marc Bolan moving slightly more into the centre stage. By this time, Mickey Finn's contribution was slightly a little bit lower down, and Marc Bolan was very much, you know, I'm on the covers, look at me.
To be able to constantly write hit songs when you're under pressure and you're trying to tour and do stuff in between time, and all the other people around you. I mean, the more success you get, the more people seem to be added to the entourage, and to stay focused like Marc did at that time was absolute genius.
Bang, 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 it's all coming out there now. You know, you can really feel T-Rex is a particular thing, and I think, you know, all these things are pointing to a high point where he's really coming into his own. He's defined in sound, he's defined what T-Rex is, and he's just, it's writing, it's all coming through.
Metal Guru, yes, that was another one of the string of hits that Marc had that after a while began to, you began to think, well, what is a metal guru, you know? You sort of started to lose a bit of patience with him. I mean, if you weren't fond of Marc and you weren't into the music, I can imagine people saying, what is this stuff, you know? Metal guru, what does it all mean? The answer was, it didn't really mean an awful lot, but it sounded good.
Metal Guru was reviewed somewhere as Mental Guru, and Marc thought that was a fantastic title for it.
I liked it on reflection more now than I did at the time. At the time, I sort of took me more of a time to understand it. I think it was again slightly heavier. He started to sort of want to rock it a bit more, and I always thought Metal Guru was the beginning of him trying to get more of a group feel on it, because if you listen to it, the Telegram Sams and all those Jeepsters things, they were very pop, straight pop, and I just think that with Metal Guru, he started to get more rocky.
The whole beginning to the track with the vocal, all that was just copied by a plethora of 70s bands, you know. His sound was really there, the 70s, sound of the 70s.
Metal Guru was another #1 hit for T-Rex, and it was one really at that stage. The whole sort of T-Rex phenomenon was there, it was established, and Marc Bolan was really reveling with his feather boa and the glitter and everything, and he was still trying to crack that American market, and it just wasn't happening. They just weren't grasping this song, and Metal Guru was it was this real sort of happy, cheery, sing-along kind of song, and they just weren't understanding it. But the British fans, they thought it was great.
We play for the kids that never saw the Beatles, never saw Jimi Hendrix. They're seeing us as those sort of people, you know, because they never saw it, they weren't around it. The average age of the audience is 15, 16, you know.
I definitely remember the whole sort of feeling at school with my school friends was that we were all still T-Rex fans, and so, you know, Metal Guru I thought was a great song, and was definitely sort of one of the T-Rex at their very best songs.
The Cider Album is a great album. It really is a great album. You know, Spaceball Ricochet, great track. You know, Metal Guru. You know, again, it's a definitive T-Rex album. It's all there to be had.
Spaceball Ricochet is definitely one of my favourites on the album. But it's difficult to choose, because I think with the Slider, I like all the tracks.
I bought a car, it was overcast. I gave it my mind and it disappeared. I said, what can I do? We're all a zoo, all I do is fade. The spaceball ricochet.
When you get an idea, you need to bang out 3 albums that I always think that are pretty much the same for the public, so the public get it. I think this was just another one in that stage. Not their best album, but still very good tracks on it. I mean, it's hard to criticise someone when they're that good.
The album had Bolan alone on the cover, looking like an hermaphrodite Lillian Gish, crossed with Shirley Temple in his Born to Boogie top hat. God bless him, what an album.
That didn't reach #1, but I think that was partly due to the fact that, of course, there were the Fly was cashing in. Now it had no longer got Marc. You know, that they were trying to get as much money out of the success of T-Rex as they possibly could, and on our pocket money, that meant that we were limited to how many, you know, sort of like particularly albums we could afford to buy.
So if you've got something and one other company's actively promoting an album, i.e. Slider, the other company that's got old stuff and things like that, just throw it out on the back of it, picking up the sales, picking up the promotion, and all it does is damage both sales.
It's a great album. He should have been completely happy with it. I think he was in a creative way, but you know, as a commercial success, he saw it as just falling slightly short.
Although at the time it was slated a little bit in the music press, I'd definitely say it's as good as Electric Warrior. Now looking back, of course, I mean there are songs and lyrics like the, you know, sort of like When I'm Sad I Slide, Watch Me Now I'm Gonna Slide, which I think shows that that the pressure of being famous was definitely getting to Marc. And I remember June sort of saying that they would, by that time they were getting to be prisoners in their own home because of the fact that you know, so many fans had found out where they lived.
And when I'm sad, I slide.
It seemed to sort of mark that meltdown point when a star just suddenly moves from being the buzzword, everybody's sort of rooting for you, and then suddenly you tip over the edge and you're on the way down. And I think Marc was starting to slide a little bit at that point. So many factors combined, really. Health, emotional problems. You know, the novelty was beginning to wear off, probably for him as well, you know. He needed a rest and needed a break.
It's been a hard year for us, but in a couple of years maybe I'll have a holiday. So, yeah.
How long do vous comptez faire ce métier? Longtemps?
Doing rock and roll, I'll probably do it for about 4 or 5 years more, and I'm going to start directing films shortly. So that should be interesting. Going into a whole other thing.
Grind. It is good for your mind. Get twist and shout. Let it all hang out, but you won't fool the children of the revolution. No, you won't fool the children of the revolution. No, no, no.
Marc wrote that song for Joe Cocker, actually. And if you listen to the version of Children in the Revolution in the movie Born to Boogie, Elton John plays the piano in something of an approximation of a Leon Russell type style. And the sonic of the song in the film is nearer to how it was written.
The children of the revolution, you won't fool the children of the revolution. You won't fool the children of the revolution.
A lot of people had said the single version wasn't as good as the version that was on the film. It was a little bit more kind of rocky. Again, Bolan was leaning towards those psychedelic early years, and it was just a very psychedelic song.
Children of the Revolution, September 72, number 2. And let's hope that Marc accepted it as a number 2, because often, well, always, if a song went to number 2, it didn't exist in his world.
I was absolutely gutted that Children of the Revolution didn't get to number 1. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I just thought Marc was going to get to number 1 forever.
Children of the Revolution, again, was one of those songs that was held off the top spot by someone like Benny Hill or something. It would have been number 1, I think.
Children of the Revolution, to me, is like the beginning of his 3rd stage. I actually thought it was one of the greatest records he's ever made. I actually thought the sound changed. It really started to change. For me, the production, being a producer, I started to hear the sound change. It was like, sort of orchestrated in sort of a rock way. It just was bigger.
In the falling rain, I drive a Rolls Royce, 'cause it's good for my voice, but you...
T-Rex were on a roll, and Marc was on a roll. And the roll became a Rolls. I've got a Rolls Royce because it's good for my voice.
Marc was a leader, he was an icon, so people responded to just the very title.
That became my protest song. Whenever I was sort of angry and with anything, then I'd go up and put Children of the Revolution on full blast.
Children of the Revolution was actually originally used on a film that Marc Bolan made with Ringo Starr. And again, this was another attempt of his to try and break this American market, because the Beatles had been a big band in America. And so he got together with Ringo and said, right, well, let's put together like a little film. And the film was called Born to Boogie.
I have a film company with Ringo, and I will be making film. I think anything where the media is kind of an expansion of rock and roll. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about revolutions. The only revolution that's going to happen is if people like myself or Mick Jagger or Rod Stewart or whoever try to get into other fields, be it television, be it movies. Then we will get a revolution.
It's what people tend to fall into when they want to move their creative sources to another medium, when I think they should think very carefully about doing that. Everyone's made that, there's very few quadrophenias out there.
At the time, everybody was quite excited about it and was hoping it would be a real documentary about the band and about Marc Bolan, who was still a phenomenon that people were discovering and were anxious to know more about. But it really didn't tell you a lot about Marc, the actual film. The great thing now, of course, it is a record of him performing live.
Very enjoyable document of something that went on, of all these girls going completely bonkers.
I went to see it. I went to see it with my best mate, Dick Norman, on acid. And it was during the afternoon, and it was full of screaming, banshee-like little wailing teeny bob girls. And it was better than being at the gig, except it kept stopping and going into these studio bits, or what were, to me and Dick, hysterically funny comedic bits.
The fans just thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. But there were people who had their reservations about it, who thought it was a bit of a waste of time, who thought it was, again, Marc Bolan just sort of massaging his ego, trying to make himself out as the centre of attention.
More people would have gone to see it had it been released those 6 months earlier. But I think by the time it sort of got round to sort of all the provincial cinemas, at the beginning of '73, Marc sort of hit total, dominance of the singles charts was starting to wane.
But I can't get no satisfaction. All I want is easy action. Stern as a lamb with the thoughts of a tiger. Moves like a cat and knows how to ride her.
Solid Gold Easy Action to me started to get a bit confusing to me. It started to become a little bit cliched. It's sort of like, he was I sort of think he was sort of struggling a bit. I mean, it was still great.
It wasn't Solid Gold Easy Action. It was a good rock and roll record, a good kind of record of that genre, but it was not Telegram Sam, or it wasn't Hot Lover, it wasn't like a White Swan.
Smiling, my wondrous walk by my telephone dialing. I can't get no satisfaction. All I want is easy action, baby.
Very simple. I mean, just a very, very easy song to dance to. There was nothing to read in between the lines. It wasn't a song that the lyrics you would remember that much. They were just very, very catchy.
20th Century Boy, released March 1973, reached only number 3 in the charts. But it's the best heavy metal track by T-Rex ever. It's a dance floor filler. If you play that at a wedding, guaranteed fight.
Friends is fine, friends is good. Everybody says it's just like Robin Hood.
The thing that I love about 20th Century Boy, and lots of bands used the technique again later, and I'm sure on purpose, is that at beginning, before the riff starts, you hear the hiss from the amps. So you get the tss, you can hear the amps are on, the guitar's turned up and it's ready to go, and then you hear Marc shout from a distance, and then man, that's heavy.
Friends is fine, friends is good. Everybody says it's just like Robin.
Cool guitar riff. It's straight in there, in the door, boom, let's go. Cool.
Wow, friends is great. I mean, just everything about it. It's so bold. It's got the sexiness. It's got the cheeky connotation, it's just everything.
Well, it's plain to see you were meant for me. I'm your told the 20th century toy. 20th century toy. I wanna be your boy. 20th century toy. I wanna be your boy.
It doesn't quite have that sort of pizzazz that tracks like Hot Love and Get It On had. It doesn't have the sort of the different elements of music. Hot Love was very much, you had a slower part, a faster part, and the backing vocals, and there was like 3 distinct sections of the song, whereas 20th Century Boy was just the song on its own.
It wasn't a bad record, it just was T-Rex. It's Marc, it's T-Rex, it's 20th Century Boy. Okay.
I think Marc's famous for, for 20th Century Boy when he has done a lot better stuff, a lot better songs than that.
20th Century Boy, that's who he was, that's what he was, and that was him shouting from the rooftops.
By the time 20th Century Boy had come out, Marc Bolan wasn't getting those #1s anymore, and it was something that was really starting to worry him. He couldn't understand why the songs weren't getting to #1. As far as he was concerned, they were, the great songs that he'd always made, but they just weren't getting to #1. And David Bowie was starting to come out by this stage, and I think, in a way, although Bowie and Bolan had been friends, Bowie had opened for Tyrannosaurus Rex in the past, he was starting to steal a little bit of the limelight away from Marc Bolan, and Marc was quite jealous of this.
When David started to take off, I think there was a bit of rivalry there, and David would always watch Marc Bolan's career, study it. He would always be going on about it, Oh, Mac's just been to America and he's not cracked America yet, and we're going out next week. It was like that, like a football team. He would always watch what he was doing and how he was getting on. And I think he wanted to get bigger than Marc, because we hadn't quite got to the same level at that time as Marc Bolan was at with T-Rex. And I think David wanted to, get to the top of the division before he did.
Tank's album, I think what it did was it sold in the UK and Europe. It did pretty well, and I think it sold because of where he was at that particular point. But again, it failed more so in the States. Not even getting really inside the top 100 really, and that's, again, I'm sure it had a massive effect on him.
Tank's had this rather dubious picture of Marc astride a tank with the barrel pointed outwards.
Mary Whitehouse, who was a campaigner of keeping TV clean, she was outraged because she said it was phallic, and she tried to get the album cover banned as being obscene. And I think that was good publicity for Marc.
Born to Boogie's on there, which is an interesting point because Born to Boogie was the name of the film that he did with Ringo Starr and stuff, and that song isn't on the film, in the film, so that was interesting for a start.
It had a fuller sound, and although it wasn't sort of quite as commercially successful, and Marc, you could see Marc had perhaps put on a little bit of weight, it still had some sort of really good songs on it.
I just think with Tanks, it showed that he was a little bit, not how can anyone be bored, but boardish, and he's sort of into autopilot. T-Rex is now a machine, it's going on. And I don't think he's been out of, because the American thing has not sort of happened as well as it could have done. I think he's sort of struggling a bit with where does he go next.
He didn't have the height in America I just don't think they knew what to do with them. I think they didn't know what to do with glam rock. You know, by the time they were dealing with glam rock, Kiss and Bowie broke at the same time, so it was okay for Bowie because Kiss had come through. So they're like, oh right, make up glam rock. Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, we can deal with that. But you know, it was too late for him.
Groover, I think, is another feature track that had basically that gave Mickey Finn certainly something to do. It was Mickey and his conga playing.
It was starting to reflect a slight decline in Marc's popularity because it went to number 4, you know. And if I got a single at number 4, I'd be quite happy. That's quite successful.
Slippery slope for me. It's like, sounds a bit like we need another single.
There's a point where you think that you're impregnable, where you think it doesn't matter what I write, I'm writing great stuff. And all of a sudden the audience turn around and go, yeah, that wasn't that good. You go, what do you mean? Everything I write's great. You love everything I write.
At the time, everything that Marc brought out I thought was wonderful. But I definitely remember that sort of, you know, by the time the Groover came out, the amount of my friends who were still T-Rex fans was starting to diminish. I love the fact that it started, you know, T-R-E-X. Although, of course, obviously that was one of the things that he was accused of, you know, starting to become very egocentric. You know, the lyrics were starting to become very egocentric, and that's when the press was starting to sort of pick on him, and you know, he was losing the plot.
No, I'm not having it. This is where I end my relationship with T-Rex. It's all over. But you've got to remember, this is a band who've had 40 million bloody sales of records so far. 4 number 1s, 3 number 2, 2 number 3s, and 1 number 4. And you know what? It's sort of forwards and then backwards.
There were so many things that Marc Bolan and T-Rex made in the 70s, and their music, certainly the early stuff that came out on that Electric Warrior album, for me that just summarises the 70s. You listen to that, that's early 70s, that's glam, it's got that distinctive stamp on it.
Marc used to say success is like riding on the back of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, but it may turn round and bite your head off.
He created glam rock, but unfortunately, of course, then everybody jumped on the bandwagon, and you know, sort of like people like sort of Gary Glitter pushed it to silly extremes.
People called him a glam rock star, and he was really, but he and Gary Glitter and Elton John and Slade were all part of that so-called glam rock thing. But I think Marc was a little bit above that, actually. He was much cooler than that. I think he was a bit hipper.
There was more to T-Rex, and they did suffer when it all sort of beginning to move again. Their popularity sort of stopped and waned a bit, but I always thought they were just a fantastic band, and Marc was a great writer of a boogie and a riff.
He was starting to lose a little bit of that oomph that he'd had in the past, and I think the fans were starting to move away.
T-Rex started to sort of lose a little bit of impetus, and he started to reassess himself.
boys are home. My guardian angels run down my telephone. The heat's on, mister, can't you hear them scream? Whatever happened to the teenage dream?
Cool, very good. Whatever happened to the Teenage Dream? Such a good record, you know, and such a brave record, because it had gone a little bit wobbly.
Obviously an autobiographical song, and rather strangely I remember that there were 3 songs out at the same time, all with teenage in the title. Alice Cooper's Teenage Lament, Mark's Teenage Dream, and The Suite with Teenage Rampage. And you know, sort of obviously at the time I would never have admitted that in actuality, if I'm really honest, of the 3 songs, the best of the 3 is actually The Suite's Teenage Rampage. Probably, I think, because of the fact that that's what teenagers want to do, really, isn't it? They want to rampage.
This was him again, just, you know, just tickling the chin of the undercurrent of the mothers and fathers and the adults, and just having a bit of fun on there. And I think you know, it has a really oldie world feel to me as well. You know, it has a lot of stuff going on in there. Lyrically, like I say, it's not explicit or anything like that, but it's you know, it's verging on that sort of that fun side, a little bit of the risky and stuff like that. Just a good fun piece, I think.
But all was lost when her mouth turned green. Whatever happened to the teenage dream?
There's this kind of strange British take on rock and roll. If you weren't in on the joke that it's kind of spoofing early British rock and roll, like Cliff Richard and the sort of the Burt Weedons and the Billy Furies and that kind of. If you didn't quite get that joke, then I don't think it meant an awful lot.
I think Mark was definitely, by that time, you know, he was starting to wonder, you know, whatever happened to the teenage dream, because he was the teenage dream and he was no longer getting to #1, and I don't think he knew why. You know, I don't think he'd worked out how to reverse that.
It just started to become a little bit of a mush to me then. It's just like they're not like, you know, Telegram Sam, and they're not like Metal Guru, they're not like Children of the Revolution, they're not like Ride a White Swan. Those classics, I just feel struggling. I always, you know, you like them, but sometimes you need more time to like them than you would the others. So maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing.
Baby blue.
He declared glam rock dead in 1974. He was looking for a new musical direction, but he never found a musical direction that was sort of commercial, that people actually wanted to buy, because he got into sort of like soul music.
Change is coming just like the sun. Change is coming, you better run.
If you look back on it, you can see that he is sort of coming to the end of writing all those singles, banging them out. And I think probably he wanted to get back into writing full albums, proper albums, not proper because that's demeaning what he does, but more album orientated stuff, and trying to build up a more album based following.
I was working with an American band called Carmen, based in London for a while, and managed to get as producer for our band a guy called Tony Visconti, who was working at the time with David Bowie, Marc Bolan, Paul McCartney, and at that time Mark was restructuring the band. I think Bill Legend, bless him, had decided for whatever reason to retire for a short while or move on, and Tony was saying that could I go do some session work with Mark, and was taken down to Scorpio Studios, and we started recording Zinc Alloy and the Hidden Riders of Tomorrow album.
He's gonna be glad when you take the hand off the dick we've got. Oh yeah.
jumbled up cornucopia of all different influences and ideas, new and old, melding and clashing and exploding and hopefully turning us on.
As an artist, he was being put other colours onto his palette that maybe he couldn't use in his paintings quite so easily as other people.
Other things at this point could have been maybe becoming to influence slightly on his creative side.
Marc was sort of always believed in himself. You know, from his earliest sort of days, he knew he was going to be a star. He wanted to be a star. That was his driving force. And of course, obviously, to believe in yourself that much means that you've got, you know, quite a big ego. And unfortunately, if you've got quite a big ego, then cocaine just makes it worse. It just makes it bigger. And then, of course, you know, at the same time, I think Marc was becoming surrounded by yes men who wouldn't tell him, you know, don't do that, it's rubbish.
His partnership with Tony Visconti had separated. Tony and Marc had kind of their friendship had gone thin halfway through the album of Zinc Alloy. So Marc had that to finish himself, and he thought that he was able to produce himself. So then he's riding without the influence of the guy that had helped him along so long, which was Tony Visconti. The plot was, you know, was a bit fuzzy.
It was a bad move to relocate to America simply for the fact that he was now in the culture, in Hollywood, in that whole drugs, drink thing.
There was a period when I guess he was doing cocaine and drinking brandy, which he shouldn't have done because that made him put on weight, and that altered his personality slightly. He did become a little bit unbearable for a short period. This is to be expected, really. All rock stars go through their unbearable phase.
Another thing which I think did have a negative effect on his life was the splitting up of him with his wife June. And June kept Marc sort of on quite a tight leash, really. And that was the thing, you know, Marc and June split up, and he was then a lot more free to eat what he wanted, to take, you know, sort of more drugs than June would probably have let him take, and to drink more.
Truck off tour I did with him, which was most of the tracks from the Zinc Alloy album, when he was actually playing and doing his wild guitar work. Maybe some of the notes were right, maybe some of them weren't, but it didn't really matter. It's like looking at Salvador Dali. Was that correct, that what he painted? It didn't really matter, because what he was doing as a musician, when he played the right or wrong notes, it was the excitement, it was the way that he put it across that was exciting. I don't think that was a weakness.
Live, no, he always gave his all, Marc. He was always bouncing around, full of energy. But the only weak point, I would say, was that the numbers weren't terribly well rehearsed, you know. They'd fall apart maybe at the end. They didn't really think about endings. It was all sustained by the hysteria of the audience, the jamming. It's like a jamming band, really. And if you took away that kind of support, then it could collapse. It could, you know, they didn't really have the reserves of arrangements and songs to sustain like a whole 2-hour concert.
when he was sober, when he was playing, he was very, very powerful, very, very positive, and he knew exactly what he wanted from himself and from other people.
Marc was in his element on stage, you know, because he was coquettish, he teased, he wound him up, he did it with a smile, he did it with his guitar, he did it with his trousers, he did it with his audience.
He did get quite good on the electric guitar. He was getting, he really took off on it, and he could make all the right moves, certainly, and make an exciting rock and roll noise on the lead guitar.
When I was recording at that time with Marc, he would have a song idea and so on, and he would sometimes give us a guide vocal, but then it could possibly change. When he went to the studio, he'll probably have half a dozen ideas and a few lyrics written down, but yet the song vocally wouldn't possibly, wasn't always complete. There was like, he'd say, no, it's going to go like that. He knew basically the arrangement of the songs, but then it could change at any time.
Marc was a sponge. He sort of collected ideas and then sort of evolved them into his own thing. So I think it was a great loss for Marc when Mickey Finn left, or well, really was sacked.
I would say that I don't think Marc noticed he was gone, because at that particular point he was developing other projects, and he was too involved in himself and his desperate need to succeed. So I don't think it was of a great impact to him. I think he just thought, well, that's how that is, that's okay, I'll just keep going.
Actually, that's a bloody good record. It's sort of overlooked a little bit, you know, it wasn't quite as successful, and it sort of shows you sort of where it's beginning to sort of not fall, I hate that word, fall apart. It's just beginning to lose its impetus. It's the actual audience and the band are beginning to struggle with the movement of it all, and it's just it's sort of treading water badly now.
These records were far superior work to a lot of what other people were doing, you know. But every painting Picasso did was not the Mona Lisa. In fact, none of them were.
By this time, I was sort of the only Marc Bolan fan that, well, at my school, in my class. Everybody else had gone on to other things, and I also, this was the time actually that, of course, the press were ridiculing Marc. He was putting on weight. They were starting to sort of call him the pork chipolata and all sorts of, sarcastic names. And I think that's actually when sort of people who declared themselves to be Marc Bolan fans did start to have the mickey taken out of them at school. And so I don't think Light of Love was one of his better singles.
Light of Love was probably one of the biggest disappointments for that era for T-Rex, because it didn't get to the positions that some of the earlier material had got to. And really, Marc Bolan was starting to panic a bit here. And later on, the Light of Love album was actually released in America. This was again Marc Bolan having yet another attempt at trying to crack this American market, because he was so desperate to do it. And it was actually released as an album, Light of Love, and it just flopped.
The American company said, okay, to break America you need these songs, so they put an album together just especially for America.
the American thing was planned badly. In retrospect, it was planned badly. Marc tried to go in too high, you know. But it's a very difficult situation, you know, when you're mega somewhere to come somewhere else and no one really cares that much.
The one thing about all great bands who make it in the United States, especially British bands, is you tour America, you meet fantastic musicians, you meet where rock and roll came from, you suck it all in, and I think you're a better musician for it. And I think just touring Europe and just going to Japan, where it was massive, and places like that, and going to America now and then, but not obviously digging in, it sort of restricted his creative sources. And I think it shows, one, that he's sort of a little bit bored, and I think that it shows that he's not gotten, there's not enough going into him. He's not sucking in enough of the influences.
I think if Marc would have pursued and worked and toured and stayed with America, they would have liked and loved him and would have had more patience, and he would then eventually have done it. But I know he did have a struggle with the American audiences.
I actually saw Marc in the States by chance. I was on tour with Humble Pie and they were playing a gig out in Long Island, I think. And I didn't know Marc was there. And when I got there, we found T-Rex playing away to a sort of a room full of rather drunken, inebriated students from New York. They weren't getting it on at all. They really couldn't get the T-Rex phenomenon. To be honest, he was dying to death. I thought, oh yeah, this is embarrassing. And we met on the plane coming back from New York back to London. Neither of us mentioned this terrible gig, and I didn't write about it, and Marc didn't mention it once on the whole journey back. So it's like sort of something you drew a veil over this.
And then, of course, we have DB, David Bowie, sussing this because he's a hip gentleman then and now, and sort of sliding in, and becoming Ziggy. But without Marc, there could not have been a Ziggy.
He took the glammy rocky thing, even though I don't think Bowie was that glammy rock anyway. He took the glam rock thing and the dressing up thing from Bolan, and of course Bowie cracked it in America, and unfortunately Marc Bolan didn't do it. You know, T-Rex didn't really take off in the States. It was more a British thing. I don't think Americans could see it.
There was the friendship and the association with Bowie and Marc Bolan, but I think Marc always sort of quite resented the fact that David Bowie was having success in America, and he wasn't. But he was trying so hard.
The great thing about David Bowie was that he was, I think, maybe a little bit more in tune or more able to make a change and create new characters, because he was an actor, was able to act, so he could assume characters. And I think because he was probably looking and traveling around and watching what other bands were doing at the time, was able to create all these characters. He could tap into all those energies and use them. I think maybe Marc would probably have had to spend a little bit more time, or spend a little bit more time in America.
They both grew up in London. I think Marc was very much more of a London boy than David was. He managed to sort of be a lot more sort of international. And so I think that was, Marc was basically, I think, a little bit too British to translate to American audiences.
Do you remember when we left? You moved behind me, girl, like a stainless chain, and
If you've known somebody when they were broke and charming and friendly and happy, it's always a shock when you meet them, say 2 years after they've had their massive success, and they put on weight and they become jowly and grumpy and sort of see the world as their enemy. I'm not saying that happened to Marc in its entirety, but that does happen to rock stars. So he went through a period of being a little bit over the top.
This was Marc loosely speaking, in his Fat Elvis period. A thing that befalls many. John Lennon had his Fat Elvis period, you know. Sitting around looking at the swimming pool for inspiration. And Marc had his Fat Elvis period. And sometimes the music became Fat Elvis period.
Every time I was with Marc, it was like a party situation, very, very relaxing. You went into the studio, there was like food there, and there was wine and champagne, pink champagne he used to like to drink, and everybody was kind of very relaxed, and we're going to do this. No one was allowed to drink too much, but it was almost a party atmosphere, and never too much pressure, and that's what I remember about the time I was recording with Marc.
Zip Gun Boogie was a kind of it's probably something that he'd read in a New York juvenile delinquent book, which was all about zip guns from the 1950s and 60s. Because I remember reading a book about New York gangs using these zip guns, and I think that's probably where Marc got the idea from.
The single Zip Gun Boogie, I actually sort of, even though it didn't do as well as Light of Love, I personally preferred. I thought it had a more punchy beat. I thought Light of Love, Marc's vocals were kind of a little whiny.
Zip Gun, to me, not an album. It's stuff that's been recorded before, it's been around a long time. They obviously needed to deliver an album.
The Zip Gun album, I think the effect on sales with that was because Light of Love, which had been put out before in the States, had material that ended up on Zip Gun.
It was a bit of a bizarre one for Bolan, because he was pulling together all these things that had already been worked on, and some of which had been available previously on American import. And it was actually the first album, the first T-Rex album, that Bolan had exclusively produced. He had fallen out with Tony Visconti. He had really fallen out with Mickey Finn, although Mickey is credited on that album. Obviously he'd worked on some of the tracks when he was still in T-Rex. So 1975 for Marc Bolan was a really, really bad time, and it was almost like the low point of his musical career. And suddenly seeing that this album wasn't doing very well in England, which had always been his stronghold, and that it hadn't done well when it was originally released in America, I think Marc was really starting to question what it was that he was actually doing. Where was he going wrong? What did he need to do?
That record was part of the ladder to coming back again, you know? Marc had to get a whole bunch of stuff out of his system, I guess, you know. Make it big, lots of people wailing away, you know. 4 million guitars, da, da, da. You don't need it, you know.
Most fans sort of tend to think of it as being probably his worst album, because let's face it, everybody's got to have one that's worst.
The New York City single was quite a point because he'd been sort of out of action as far as the hit singles and stuff go, and floundering slightly somewhat. You know, desperately looking. And here's another case in point where it's one of those things that he actually did take himself away and look to create something. He was being influenced by probably the music of the day. He was in America. He was, you know, he was soaking up that culture, and he wrote New York City, which was like, all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, he can still do it.
I did, don't you know? I did, don't you know? I did, don't you know? Don't be shy.
It was a cool record because it was allegorical and stuff like that, you know. It was more whimsical, you know, and it was more phantasmagorical. It was Marc using words to write pictures for your mind, you know, for your ears.
I did, don't you know? I did, don't you know? I did, don't you know? Don't be shy.
It was very, very simple, and as far as I'm aware, Marc had seen a lady coming out of New York City with some with a puppet frog or a frog in her hand, and he must have thought that was, you know, a little bit bizarre, and promoted him to write a song about it. But it was kind of the lyric isn't quite so deep. It's just a fun track. It probably means more to Marc than it does anyone else.
Well, in many ways, he did capture the lunacy of New York in that song.
It did show that the real man was still in there. The capability of writing those hits was still there.
New York City is a change again. I think he's sort of trying to reassess his look, and he's trying to reassess the way his music goes, and I think he's beginning to, you know, move, and he's realised that things need to change, and I think it's very important that he does, and I think things were going to change then.
Was he really just wasting his energy focusing on this American market? And in the end, he came to that conclusion that yes, he was. At that time, he had actually been spending quite a lot of time living in America. He was living as a tax exile out there, and he was heavily drinking, he was indulging in cocaine. And it got to the point where the doctors said to him, you've got to stop this binge drinking. If you don't, you're going to die. And I think that coupled with the fact that after splitting up with June Child, his first wife, he had had this relationship with backing vocalist Gloria Jones, and suddenly found out that she was pregnant, and that was the thing, totally turned it on its head. He quit the binge drinking, he quit the drugs, he slimmed down massively, and he was ready to reinvent himself.
To get acquainted with my head in my bed, yeah.
Futuristic Dragon it's sort of it's a strange pair because it looks like an early Tyrannosaurus Rex album. Its whole presence is of harking back to something, so maybe in a way he was harking back to a time before, and yet on the album the delivery was completely of the now and not of the then, and so there's a bit of an odd album.
That was getting cool again now, you see. The old periscope was coming up again now. Bit of sight.
Still a T-Rex album, but I think they still hadn't things hadn't moved on enough.
It doesn't do anything remarkable. It lends itself to look like it's one thing and ends up being something else. Bit of a lost event, really.
I saw him on the 1976 Futuristic Dragon tour, and of course by that time he'd been through his low period as well as his high period. And I think the one thing which by then he really did appreciate was the die-hard fans who'd sort of stuck with him through thick and thin, and he thanked us all for coming, you know, and for sticking with him. And I've got my own recording of the 1976 concert, which was at Birmingham Town Hall, and in it he thanks us for going and seeing him and not the Bay City Rollers.
London Boys, for me, not a great record, okay, but not fantastic. Maybe just like a great, I don't know, football or tennis player. He'd peaked, and to get back, it was quite hard to get back.
London Boys was all right. No, it was all right. It was all right.
London Boys, again, I think underlines, you know, that lostness, that harking back. Because London Boys harks back to a time he's singing about Petticoat Lane and going to Brighton and coming back. You know, it's about, I suppose it's about him. You know, the East End boy and the whole, you know, London thing. Again, it's a bit sort of soulful. He's looking back to a different time.
Oh yeah, we're the London Boys.
In the recording studio, Marc was very keen to just whack it down. Let's do it, boom, boom, boom. You know, not too much messing around. I wholeheartedly endorse that. There's too much, you know, pissing around trying to get the drum sound. You know, no one's going to know anyway. Either hit the thing right or go home, right? And Marc played me the demo of I Love to Boogie. You know, he said, it's going to be really good when it's finished. I said, it is finished. It was perfect. I love to boogie on a Saturday night.
Love to boogie. We love to boogie. Jitterbug boogie. High school boogie. We love to boogie on a Saturday night.
It was quite a sad, pathetic little song compared to all the rest.
I Love to Boogie, great record, back on form. Surprised it didn't go straight to #1. It was really, to me, probably the last classic T-Rex record.
What a great song. Very T-Rex. Very, very T-Rex. I mean, you know, you could sit that next to Jeepster and Melgaroo and all of that, and it works perfectly well.
It seemed a bit flat and a bit slightly monotonous. It wasn't as inventive as the early stuff. It wasn't as exciting as the early stuff. The stuff was starting to sound a little bit samey, or Marc Bolan's material by that stage. Just, I don't know, it was glam, but it was the dregs of glam, and it was songs like I Love to Boogie that I think pretty much caused that whole punk explosion of a load of anarchists saying, we don't want to listen to this.
I love to boogie. I love to boogie on a Saturday night. I said I love to boogie. I love to boogie, teenage boogie. I love to boogie, I love to boogie on a Saturday night.
Marc's music with T-Rex was a nice bridge in a way between that innocent British rock and roll of the 50s, the sort of Cliff Richard, Billy Fury era that he rather liked and was quite charmed by, and then the more aggressive kind of rock of the 70s, and blending that together. I suppose that must have influenced a lot of people in punk rock, which came back in the late 70s, that sort of demand for innocence, but of course they were much more aggressive and powerful than Marc's T-Rex ever were.
During the punk boom, T-Rex were like gods. The same way as Oasis looked up to the Beatles, most punks looked up to T-Rex as one of the bands that showed the way. They had a punk attitude, but with great songs. And every punk band I ever worked with always said T-Rex quality.
It was a funny sort of time because in the music industry around 76, 77 you had this new explosion of youth culture. Back in the early 70s when Marc Bolan had started with T-Rex, Tyrannosaurus Rex, he was kind of the height of youth culture. He was the cool thing. Now he'd gone a bit out of favour. And punk had come in. Punk was this cool thing. And Marc Bolan, being this charismatic, if you like, maybe slightly a little bit arrogant kind of musician, came up with this thing. Oh yes, well, I invented punk. I was the cosmic punk.
A lot of bands have claimed T-Rex as an influence. I can see why, because it's raunchy, simple. And he was the godfather of punk, as Marc told everybody himself many times.
My love out by the roots, but I'm not such a bad boy. Oh no, you ravish the runes of my tunes. You put on the gloves of my loves, but you're not a bad girl.
Soul of my suit is again soul searching. It's very from the heart. It's very open. You know, he was exposing himself. There was a low point in his life when he was singing about it. You know, and I think those points, the Dragon, you know, London Boys, Soul of my suit. It's you know, it's quite sad. I think it's quite sad because you feel he was sort of lost.
Oh yeah, even strode baby, rockin' and rollin'.
Sold My Suit, to be quite honest, I find it hard to remember it. I've listened to it. By then, T-Rex had stopped becoming the force they were. They had records out. They were always treated with respect. They always got good television and things like that, but they didn't make the impact they were a couple of years ago.
I Damaged the Soul of My Suit. That was a cool little record.
I mean, I think Soul is a really beautiful song as well, you know, and I just wish he'd realised that. If he'd realised more that he didn't need to try so hard, he was capable of it.
You pulled out my love by the roots, but I'm not such a bad boy. Oh no.
Marc Bolan was ready to reinvent himself, and his final album with T-Rex, although he didn't know it at the time, was Dandy in the Underworld, and it was a very personal album. In the past he'd been singing all about, you know, the witches and the goblins and all these wonderful things that he'd read about in Lord of the Rings, and then he'd sort of twist it slightly and he'd be talking more about sort of light-hearted things. But Dandy in the Underworld was really him coming clean and saying, Dandy in the Underworld is me. I had these problems. I'm coming through them.
It's got all the dark side to all the success and all the money and all the fame, but it's also got that dark undercurrent, the drink and the drugs, you know, and he was a dandy, you know, he was the flowered shirt wearing elf, you know, this ethereal figure. And I think that was his statement he was making on there. It was an exploration into his low points.
A lot of the critics believe that that was actually his best album. It was up there on a par with Electric Warrior. And it really signalled a time of big change for Marc Bolan. He was running out of money. He had to do something pretty quick. And I think it's funny because when musicians and bands are in that time where they've run out of money and they really, really need to do something to come up with a big hit so they can redeem themselves, they do seem to.
Down in the underworld, when we come up for air, oh, will anybody ever?
Not all the tracks I love, some of them were very, very good, and the memory of it will stay around for a very, very long time. Whether it's one of my favourite albums or not, I can't really say.
You have to accept it for what it is and respect its memory of Marc, but you go back to Electric Warrior and there's the real Marc Bolan.
It was an album that was bringing him back, you know. He'd sat and really constructed and really thought about it, and maybe he was trying to recreate himself and finding it, I think, on the album, finding it somewhat. You know, there was a commercial value again there.
I remember the Dandy in the Underworld tour at Birmingham Odeon, and he had the Damned as support, but he played a lot of his sort of the hits that he knew that people wanted to hear, but they had evolved a lot since they'd actually come out as singles, and this was now 77, and Marc had obviously spent a lot of time practicing his guitar playing and expanding, you know, his range.
Girl, I'm just a cheapster for your love. You slide so good, we're going so fast.
And it was around that time that he sort of started to come up with this second career. He had done some work, he'd been interviewed on a programme for Granada Television called, it was with Telly Savalas, and he had literally sort of turned this interview on its head and started interviewing Telly Savalas. It was a sort of almost like a defence mechanism perhaps, and they saw it and they thought, you know, he's got something here. And eventually, Marc Bolan was given his own TV show, and it was called Marc. The whole idea was that he was going to get up, he was going to play his music, and then he'd bring on music guests and he'd interview them and they'd play their music. And there were bands like the Boomtown Rats and Generation X had come on, and suddenly Marc Bolan was cool again.
The biggest and the best so far this week are an amazing group called Jam!
He was really starting to reinvent himself. Everything was starting to look really good. He'd lined up Susie and the Banshees to come on. He was even lining himself up to produce Susie and the Banshees' debut album, which was 1978's The Screen. These were all great things that he had all sorted out, and the Marc was meant to be the 6-part series. The final part, he had David Bowie on as a guest. They performed a duet.
The last time I actually met Marc was when I went to Granada TV studios. I went to the studio and saw David and Marc doing their big number together, and the whole thing sort of descended into farce really, because it took so long to get the number sorted out that Marc and David wanted to do together. Being in the days of strong union representation, they pulled the plugs on Marc and David while they were trying to record the song, and the studio was plunged into darkness. So I remember the producer having fits, and Marc was in tears, and David Bowie was saying, "This is really Polaroid." He was saying. His pet phrase at the time, I think. But it was a historic afternoon. It was great to see, and of course they did actually have the tune. They managed to get the number they were doing together on tape, and it was in the show. But that was the last time I saw Marc, was falling off a stage at Granada TV. He stumbled and tripped and fell off the stage.
The night of Marc Bolan's death, he'd actually been with David Bowie. He'd gone to Tony Visconti's studio. Tony wasn't there. You know, they talked about, oh, this would be great. Let's do a song together in this studio. And they'd gone out for a meal, and then Marc had gone on to this club with Gloria Jones. And of course, it was when they were coming back, very early in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, that Gloria Jones lost control of the car, and Marc, being in the passenger seat, immediately died.
I got a phone call asking me had I been listening to the radio, which I thought was a very odd thing to ask me early in the morning. No, I haven't been listening to the radio. Marc's dead. It was shocking. It was shocking.
It was just beyond belief for me, and I was just in total shock, I think, at the time.
Elvis had died not that long before you, and I was round at Marc's house and he said, "I'm glad I didn't die today." Because Elvis would have had all the space, I wouldn't have been the lead story, you know. So he waited.
I remember I was driving my car to work at Maymont Street in London, where Melody Maker office was, and I saw a billboard, a newspaper headline saying, "Marc Bolan dies in car crash," and I was really shocked, actually, and very upset, and it seemed so brutal and sudden, and I mean, he didn't deserve that. It was an awful fate, really, and it really upset an awful lot of people, because you know, a lot of people loved Marc. He was such a fun person, and he'd been through so much and achieved so much as well, and he was just on the verge of a comeback. He'd just done his new TV series, and it looked like life was going to be good for him again.
It was almost like a cruel joke that he'd really pulled himself out from being this sort of washed up, uncool person to suddenly being cool again and having all these great things lined up. And it was so cruel that it was then that he should go, and we never got to see these great things that he was working on.
If it happens at the right time, death is its own pedestal. And death has cemented Marc's place in the pantheon of rock and roll in a freeze frame.
I could have loved you, girl, like a planet.
He was like a real icon. Everyone in my industry, in this country, realised what a great player he was, what a great songwriter he was, and what a major contribution he made to rock music at that time.
Life's a guide.
He definitely diverted the course of British pop music in the very early 70s.
T-Rex were one of the most influential bands of the 70s, and they've left this great legacy of music which has inspired so many other acts right through to contemporary music these days.
Doesn't matter at all. No, it really doesn't matter at all. Life's a guide.
He managed to bang out about 15, 16 classic singles, and that is an incredibly hard thing to do, which he 1 wrote, 2 performed, and 3 went out on the road with, and I'd like to find one that can do that now.
If anything, his songs now stand out more effectively than they did at the time. I think there was this point where we did start to take him for granted, where the novelty wore off. And now at this distance in time, you can hear that all those songs are great fun. They were full of energy and amusement, and a lot of that is lacking in pop music now. You don't get that kind of sort of innocent lunacy about it all.
He was the first major artist since the Beatles to cause such a furore in England, and he left behind a legacy of sparkling, magical, rockin', good vibe, teasing, sexy, warm music.
But ego really doesn't matter at all. No, ego really doesn't matter at all. Life's a guide.